something to say, Scott MacFarlane. Maybe start with an introduction from yourself, Scott.
Yeah, Andy, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you tonight on your new channel. I'm Scott MacFarlane. I'm an East End lad. I grew up in Shettleston, or Shettleston as they say in the area. And I've moved out of Shettleston now, and I live in just outside Coatbridge. And I've kind of dedicated most of my life actually to helping other people, and predominantly working with other people and young people in general. Young people is generally my focus, and I've gravitated towards that in my working career, and obviously as a family guy as well. Spending my time looking at doing that. So, and I wanted the opportunity just to be your first guy on your new channel.
Can you say why it was? Obviously, me and you have spoken about the channel, but you know, why was it you felt motivated to do?
Yeah, I thought it would be a good time to share some information, or just share an outlook, really, an outlook in the type of person I am, the kind of way that I look at things. And obviously just share a perspective, and I thought Local Voices was a really good opportunity to do that. And as I say, I'm an East End lad, so it's very rarely as an East End guy you get the opportunity to do any type of interviews and various different things like that. And I just thought it would be a good time to be able to take that and to move it forward. And most importantly for me, it's about getting information across to people in the way that they maybe want to take it forward. I'm a non-confrontational type of character, so for me this is not really to be confrontational or directive towards people. It's more for me to give some information across, and people can see and think what they want of it. But primarily it's to look at giving people information to help them.
Great. So we've had many conversations that I mentioned at the start there about just at times the lack of diversity of opinion that you see in the kind of the mainstream narrative. Is that something you've found a bit frustrating, and have you had a similar experience?
Well, it's nothing new, Andy. I would say is the key for me. So I'll be 50 in my next birthday.
No.
And growing up in the East End of Glasgow, where I grew up, there was always various different, perspectives and stigmas of, where you were, how you grew up, what you had, what you didn't have, and what your politics were, and who you voted for, and it was a bit of a microcosm of things that was there. So for me, it's not a new thing that's happening just now in terms of some polarisation of opinions. It's not new how people's perspectives are put on television and mainstream media. I think these things have always been around. But I do understand now that through the digital generation, connection is a lot quicker. It's instantaneous. People share quickly. They get the message across quickly. And it spreads across networks far quicker than when I was, even a teenager.
So it's more possible to have a kind of a ding dong on social media.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I talk to my children, and we talk about mobile phones, and I talk about, well, my mobile phone was the call box at the end of the road.
That's right. 50 pence.
And if I wanted to meet somebody or go and see somebody, I had to go to their door and see if they were in. And especially, I was a football guy, and I know you share football as a real connection. If you wanted to go and play football and get folk, then you had to go to the door. And if you wanted to ask somebody out on a date or something like that, then generally you had to phone, or you had to go to their door. So I think it's changed in that perspective, that a lot of communication is instantaneous, and it's less direct human connectivity. So, talking to people like we're talking to people now, and using digital media to connect and things like that. So I think that time is different. But equally, information is still just information and able to be shared. And I think direct voice and talking to people is probably the best way to do that. And, on a channel such as yours, connecting with your audience is really important. if you're talking about diversity of voices, then there's so many different diversity of
Oh,
voices that's
definitely,
there.
aye, definitely. I do, aye. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Like, if I'm speaking to, I've got different family members, three sisters, a brother, my mum, my dad. Not only have they get a difference of opinion between each of them, but their opinions have changed throughout this time. So there's that, and but the frustration that I'm trying to express is at times I'll walk about in the course of my daily life and I'll hear this or that and I'll go, well, that's one way of looking at it, or I'll hear this or that, and then I'll turn on the news and immediately all that, the kind of richness and diversity of it fades away. I'd like to pick up on something that you said just now regarding it being nothing new, you know. My feeling is the changes that happened and came about in March, although it might not be anything new, it did feel different, you know. Can you maybe talk about that, whether you'd
Well,
agree with that?
well, it's interesting that you say that. It's the first time in my 50 years that I've been involved in a global pandemic. So that's definitely new. Um,
Spanish flu, you wouldn't have been old
yeah,
enough. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
it's definitely new. When I grew up, the challenges or the boogeyman
Mm.
was Russia.
Okay.
And I grew up at a time in the 80s, which was fabulous for music.
Mm.
Um, and at that time, Russia was the kind of clear enemy,
Aye.
the Cold War,
Mm.
and I talk to people my generation and we talk about air raid sirens and
Mm.
testing them and those various different things. But that fear at that time was just as
Was it?
real
Okay.
as the fear that's here just now.
Mm.
We did believe at that time that Russia could attack us and that there could be nuclear war.
That's interesting.
And as a
Aye.
wee guy growing up in the East End of
Aye.
Glasgow, when I get the time to think about stuff like that and not think about, being at school and football and all the various different things, when you think about those things have a kind of a psychological effect on you.
Aye. Mm-hmm.
And me now, even in my 50s, if I hear an air raid siren, I still get that feeling where I have that fear and that fear perspective. So I think the pandemic that we've got is the most challenging thing that we will face in this generation, and especially for our young people growing up and moving forward in that. And they will analyse this and understand this and get the context of fear similar to potentially how I got that fear when I was younger, about what was the fear factor and what was out there at that time. So there's a lot of similarities, different situations, but very similar in feel in terms of how people may feel. They may be frightened of certain perspectives and how they deal with that and how they cope with it.
No, it's interesting. I remember, just when you're saying you think back to the sirens, I remember when 9/11 happens. I always remember it. I was in the local co-op and the woman said to me, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Centers, being attacked. And I did not know what she meant. But for me, I always remembered that. It was a time when it felt like the whole world was focused on the one thing. So that's interesting that you bring that up. There is a precedent for that. You mentioned fear as a concept there, and I feel as though this whole situation, there's a lot of kind of, and even around the concept of fear, there's a lot of kind of negativity. Fear exists for a reason, and this type of situation will bring out different types of fears. Can you maybe talk, Scott, about the kind of the negatives that you feel with this situation, and maybe the positives?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognise that fear is the concept of danger. So fear is the thought of danger. Danger is really important and should be avoided. And as a human being, when you're faced with a dangerous set of circumstances, your whole biology reacts to that fight or flight, etc. But fear brings on all of these same feelings and thoughts and emotions, especially in young people. What you visualise and what you think about, your biology continues to act it out. So fear is like danger for most of us. And at the moment, when you look at a number of different things that people are in this situation, that fear is real.
No,
It's here. It's clear. And it's being lived by people. But what I'd like to say more importantly is that is a concept that you have when you look at fear and you analyse fear. It's the prospect of danger at some point in the future. And it's important to recognise that.
Okay, yeah.
Especially if you look at a global pandemic and if you look at COVID-19 and you look at the information that we are sharing just now, people weren't wearing masks or socially distancing. We are analysing our fear consistently at every point. And that fear is manifested and played out in physical. So we wear a mask, we don't wear a mask. We distance, we don't distance. These are choices that people are making. And for me, I don't criticise any one person for whatever choice that they make. In fact, I respect everybody that makes those choices. But for me, fear is always rooted in that concept. Danger is there. But it's not really. It's the thought that danger is there. It's the thought that I could catch this virus. It's the thought that I could pass this virus on to my loved ones. It's the thought that people could get unwell. But that's the anxiety and the fear perspective pushing forward. But the danger for most of us at the moment, the danger is not present. It's not there right in this specific moment in time. And it's important that we recognise that. So from my perspective, I think it's important to get your information from a number of sources.
Well, aye. Could you maybe go into a bit more detail about maybe certain individuals that you've been looking at, Scott? Because I think the counter to that would be, aye, man-made is one thing and music's another thing, but when you're dealing with people's lives, that's a different thing, and maybe it should be less open to interpretation. Maybe science is a bit less subjective. What would you say about that? Maybe it's
yeah. I think for me, one of the biggest challenges in the pandemic is science pitting science against each other. And that's clearly happening, with some scientists say one thing, some scientists say another thing. And who do you believe? For me, I think you have to live your own truth. You have to analyse things in your own perspective, in your own way, and you have to put your own filter on it. And you have to understand it and see if it resonates with you. So if the scientists like Patrick Vallance, and Chris Whitty are saying one thing, and you resonate with that, and you connect with that, then that's fine for you to do that. But if other scientists like Carol Hannigan, if he's saying something different, you've got you've got Carol Hannigan, you've got Sunita Gupta, you've got Michael Yeadon, you've got various different people on a different side of things in terms of their science. If that's your truth and that's what you resonate with, then that's fine. I think what the challenge right now is that they're pitted against each other.
You see that.
And for most people, even including me, it's very difficult to form that perspective.
I think at times as well, it almost seems as if there's like gatekeepers. You know, I've heard Matt Hancock refer to Carol Hannigan as an outlier. You know, is it almost as if like he's out there? But it wasn't too long ago that the government was saying that masks don't do anything, you don't need to wear them, but then all of a sudden you do, and I think we've seen that with the guidance changing, and at times seeming, like you say, illogical. But what you were speaking about there was a process by which you take the information in, and it's almost like critical thinking you're talking about.
Yeah, of course. I mean, when I was younger, you had to go and look at encyclopedias and go to libraries and do various different things to get your information, read books. The mainstream media was there, papers were there, it was all there. And for me, a lot of information was contained in music as well. Some amazing artists like John Lennon, you know, writing from the heart and bringing things through. So I I agree with that people are getting their information from various different ways. If Matt Hancock wants to call Carol Hannigan an outlier, that's up to him. You know, he can say whatever he wants. The challenge is if people are in a position of responsibility, and that responsibility that they have, like Matt Hancock, Boris Johnson, Nicola Sturgeon, they're in a position of responsibility that they've been given by us to take the country forward and to work from there. So the gravity for the general public is probably greater when they hear it from a voice like that.
Okay, yeah,
and that's understandable, because that's where they are, and that's where they are in the perspective, that's where they are in the field. And the challenge that we all have is that sometimes those perspectives are far too dominant. And if they're far too dominant, then most people will hear from them rather than from other areas. And when you talked about critical thinking skills, that's what I got growing up. That ability to be curious and to have critical thinking skills, and not necessarily to agree. You know, don't agree with your dad tells you. Don't agree with your ma tells you. Gets you into trouble when you're wee, but when you grow up and you become an adult, you understand that those learning environments, those pushing and pulling, you know, with your brothers or your sisters and your peers in your group, that pushing and that pulling and that critical thinking skills are essential for you as you move forward. And I think for young people, it's essential that they get that. And I do think there is a lack of that in society. And I think that you shouldn't just accept the word because that is the word. You should say, okay, well, why is that the word? Where does it come from? How does it put together? Where does that information come from? And does it feel right for me? Is it good for me to accept that? And that does come from being curious and wanting to know. It's a bit like when the pandemic came around in March. My instant reaction was to say, let's lock down, let's see how things go. We've got a deadly virus on our hand.
That's how you reacted at first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I went, okay. But then I became curious, and then my critical thinking skills came in. And then I went and looked at not just all of the information that's being presented, but largely, I would say 99% I've been compliant in terms of the way that we take things forward. But I do think that's intrinsic in my nature to have empathy and respect and understand other individuals, regardless of how I feel and regardless of what my own individual truth is. So when you go out, I'm out, I've got a mask, I do 2 metre social distancing. And in my workplace and professional area, I'm responsible for people. I do these things too. And it's important to recognise that we have to play a part in society and be in society in order to live in society. But that absence of critical thinking and curiosity, especially I would say in the way that the mainstream media put across lots of their information, I think that will be detrimental to society over a longer period of time.
No, it was really interesting what you were saying there about going through that process and how you felt one thing at the start and thought one thing at the start, and then you went through a process and you feel differently about it. Do you feel that that's happened across a wide spectrum of society?
In terms of the wider society, what do I notice? For me, I notice people smiling less. And that for me is a negative. You know, because when I smile a lot, because naturally I'm quite happy, and I think happiness is a choice and it's an inner choice. But when I go around and I see people at Tesco's or I see them at shops waiting in lines and people with masks on and various different things, I don't get a sense that they're happy. And I don't get a sense that that's there. I can't answer for are they happy. I can only go with the natural human perspective, which is when you look at someone's face,
Aye.
you know where they're at. And
Aye.
for me, I can comment quite clearly for me that people don't seem to be happy. And it's a difficult thing to say because we're in the middle of a pandemic. But in the human condition and being human, a smile transforms things. It transforms conversations. It transforms life. And when you smile at someone and they smile back at you, it's not they could even be having a hard day, a difficult day. They could be worried about a pandemic, but that instant human connection
Aye.
is made. And I see less of that, Andy.
It's funny, you say that, because as you're talking, I'm picturing Tesco and all that, and it's you see a lot of the masks, and I find there's been times where I've been speaking to someone honestly, and I realise after a couple of minutes, it's you, you know, but because I don't recognise them, so I don't recognise them visibly. So their capacity to express themselves and all that is significantly less as well.
But we hope it's temporary, Andy. That's the most important thing that we can be as human beings. When you experience, so I'm saying to you about not being able to see someone smiling. My hope in spirituality and being a spiritual person with a lot of love and empathy is that that's temporary. And, you know, when I was younger, my dad and various different things, we used to always thought it's always darkest before dawn. And sometimes things can look very bleak and very dark. I'm one of those people that's saying, okay, there's a bit of darkness there, that's really bleak, but I'm looking on that horizon for the dawn and for the light and the lightness to be there. So my hope, Andy, my real hope is that this is temporary. In terms of conversations, I know we've had conversations in past, and I always say to you that, you know, life is temporary. You know, I'm an ex-footballer that needs 2 new hips and a hip operation, and I kind of hobble around, but I know it's temporary, and I know that at some point I will move past that and move into something different. So with the global pandemic, and if you're seeing people in masks and not recognising them, and if I'm seeing people and there's an absence of smiles, my real hope and desire is that that's temporary, and not putting a fixed timeline on it is a clear thing. Yeah.
Aye.
Well, my hope is that it would be next month. My hope is that it would be for Christmas. But I'm a realist as well, Andy.
Aye.
And as a realist, you can understand that we have got some way to go.
Definitely,
in this process.
And I think it's interesting, that phrase that came out, I'd say a few weeks in. It was very soon after this situation really kicked off in the UK, where we heard that phrase, the new normal. And when I heard that, I thought, well, that's a bit strange. You know, I'd never thought of the new normal, or the old normal. Life just was. And I think some people have the hope and the expectation that we'll go back and it'll be the old normal. I've heard people say that. But it seems to me there's a bit of trepidation about what the new normal represents. What's your opinion on that? The old normal, the new normal? Is there such a thing?
Change is frightening. Human beings avoid change at all costs. And it's interesting, Darwin, who his theory of evolution and various different things, it's not the fittest of the species, the smartest of the species, or the strongest of the species that survives. It's the one that's most adaptable to change. And what are humans not good at? Change.
Aye.
Majority of us, if a routine, by the way, I am not, I am affected by this like everyone else. If my routines changed of a day, you're saying to yourself, that change is quite challenging. And really what you're talking about there is change. The new normal. I've heard other things like the Great Reset. I've heard other information, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, climate change. All of these things signify change for me. And if you analyse change, people go through a process.
No, I think back to, you know, the kind of 2000s onwards, and I remember it as a time of perhaps more, maybe more freedom, you know. When I think about when I was 17, 18, I went and did, started travelling. I went round Europe and decided I wanted to, bought my ticket and went and done it. And that was just normal. And my question would be to yourself, Scott, you mentioned the word adapting and things getting difficult. Just to kind of dig into that a bit more, is there anything that you see on the horizon that you're not happy about and that you would not adapt to?
I think what you were kind of talking to me about is lines in the sand. And where's my line? Do I draw a line at certain points? Individually, for my own biology, I'll draw a line on whatever I think's right. For my mental health, I'll draw a line on what I think's right. For my physicality, I'll draw a line where I think that's right for me as an individual. But I also have to have the ability to adapt and compromise and change, because to do that for me is about respecting other people. You know, I've spoken to you and I respect you an awful lot, Andy. And mainly the reason I respect you, and I would respect most people, is you've got something to say. You've got a way that you want to express yourself and what you want to do. And as long as you're not harming other people in that, then you should have an ability to do that. You talked about freedom, freedom to travel, freedom to go and do various different things. My hope is that the feelings and the things that people are talking around in the edges, that they're temporary. You know, like, you know, digital passports and travel and things.
Oh,
my hope is that these things are temporary. My job, and if I was, it's not really my job to convince other people. As I said, it's just really me and you having a conversation and me outlining a perspective. And if people can take anything away from that, I'm delighted at that. But equally, if they've got an opposing, you know, vision and various different things, that's the beauty of your channel. You'll have them on.
No, definitely,
You'll put them where they need to be.
In regards to yourself, Scott, you've spoken throughout, and I think um, the reason why I like to speak to yourself is you provide quite an expanded and balanced point of view, which stems from your spirituality. What do you think? You've talked a lot about science, interestingly, throughout. What what is it that gives you hope, kind of going forward? We've mentioned about, you know, dark before the dawn, and you know something arising in the horizon. What is it that gives you hope for not just for yourself and your own family, but collectively?
The ability for humans to be conscious. Consciousness is it gives me hope. Inside that consciousness, you have the whole myriad and spectrum of what it is to be human. Creativity. We could never have got to the moon without creativity. Science helps that. Spirituality, you know, good thinking processes, good science around your health and how you look after yourself. But fundamentally, my hope is that people are human and you have consciousness. I do believe that with the advent of technology, things become easier. But I also hope that consciousness can transcend and move forward and move beyond that, and move and move people and get them to a different perspective. So I believe at this precise moment in time, that dawn, that light that I see is consciousness in people, is that understanding, and that connection. That's why when I talked about a smile is about being human. It's about connection, and it's about looking into the person's eyes and having understanding. And I think that consciousness is important. And the more I see that, and the more that I feel that and experience that, I have great hope in what's happening for people. And it's not dark. In fact, it's light. And if you add into that that ability to have empathy, regardless of a person's circumstances. True empathy, which is really difficult to achieve. If you can empathise with people who have done bad things to you and others connected to you, if you can truly do those things, I think through your consciousness you have great empathy to be able to do that. I'm hoping that that's where, as human beings, that's where we go and that's what we do.
I think it's fair to say that the young people that we work with on a daily basis live in a different world to what we did.
Yeah.
And our parents would say the same. But I think that at times I feel like the presence of technology and the young people, this latest generation, the presence of technology at such an early age. How would you talk about the role of technology with regards to this development of consciousness, creativity? Can these two things exist side by side, or is there?
Of course they can.
Aye.
The digital aspect and the technological aspect is an amazing concept, but on its own, singularly, I think it lacks depth. It lacks that beauty. It can enrich things, it can bring things out, and it can augment certain things. But for me, the human aspect of that and the digital aspect of that is going to be something that I hope transcends even what Elon Musk is talking about, Neuralink and symbiotic life, etc. You don't have to be plugged into the digital system to have symbiotic life. We've got it right now. Technology is all around us and we're connected to it. We shouldn't be frightened of it. We should embrace it, but we should not let it dominate.
No, definitely. No, it's a really rich perspective, and the balance between technology being a tool or being a threat. I suppose this channel's an example of that. I mean, we're going to share this far and wide, and we wouldn't have that capacity without this technology.
Yeah, and I've heard in lots of different sources about technology and, things being really challenging around the technology side of things. People do say, and I've heard it on the internet and various different things, that, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all these big organisations, multimedia, etc. All those tools are there for us. The tools that these large corporations have used to get a foothold in the mainstream media and to push forward messaging, etc., they're the same tools as we've got. The same tools. We do have the same tools. And I know that we've spoken a couple of times about, but some of these voices are being shut down. Some of these people are being deplatformed. That's just the nature of reality and the way things are, Andy. Those tools are definitely there. And if you look, it's that amazing creativity, the human being and the human spirit. New technologies and new platforms are growing already. They're already growing. Alternatives to Facebook, alternatives to YouTube. What we've got to do is just understand and live in that moment and that environment that these things are happening. But the conditions for YouTube and Facebook to start, those conditions are still around at the moment. And if people say to me, oh no, Facebook and YouTube will shut you down and Twitter will shut you down, okay, that's them. But they originated from nowhere. And I'm old enough to have lived before the internet and understood before the internet, and to see all of these huge corporations develop and grow from nothing. That's still present at the moment. The danger for us is to believe that that's not there, and to fear that we can create platforms, we can create various different things. That's the danger that we get into, Andy. We should believe that most things are possible if you have bit of determination, some creativity, curiosity, critical thing. If you can put those things together, then you've got a great chance of getting things off the ground. The failure is to believe. It really is to believe, and we see it consistently in young people and lots of other people, that they don't believe in themselves, they don't believe in it, and people have not cultivated that and not helped people understand and believe that. So when I talk to you about technology, and I talk to you about voices and platforms, and why did I want to come on here, this is an alternative platform. You have an alternative platform, and you created that, and you created it from the way that you wanted to put something forward. And I've come on to speak on it because I've liked that idea. It's no different from YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. All right, it's no different from that. The creation process has been really important for you, and to put those things together. I think the real tragedy and the real hardship is not to believe. And my hope is that throughout the pandemic and all the fear that's there, that this is temporary, and that we can get back to, not a new normal, get back to some semblance of being human.
Aye.
And understanding what it is to be human, and connecting, respecting, and being part of that for everyone.
Aye. No, I found throughout, Scott, the kind of hope that you give, although you're a realist throughout, you're kind of real about...
You've got to survive, Andy, as well.
Aye, that's it. And the challenges that people face and the fear, but what I'm getting from you is kind of an overall optimism that this is temporary, we don't know what's going to happen, and maybe a bit of, what would you call, going with the flow type thing? A bit of that?
Yeah. It goes back to what I said very early on in our discussion about adaptability. Okay? And that adaptability means that you should have an ability to blend, to compromise, to understand, to respect, to have empathy. Doing all of those things allows you to survive. It allows you to survive. And lots of people could go down a pathway in saying, oh, there's a pandemic, our freedoms have been taken away, etc., etc., etc. Inside here, I'm unbelievably free. And I'm happy. And I'm connected. And I'm balanced. And I want to show that to other people. And I want them to connect with that. And I do think that that's a choice, an inner choice.